morning. This is the public review session for August 7th, 2017. We'll begin with a special order calendar. Decision items. Item number 1, 70-97BZ, 575 Lexington Avenue, Manhattan.
Hey, they submitted a photograph of the out-swinging door, which seems to have been what the fire department objection was, so I really think there isn't anything else that we need to do.
Continued hearings. Item number 2, 374-71BZ, 20511 Northern Boulevard, Queens. We have an adjournment request of 4 to 6 weeks.
Right, and then I just want to point out that this has been adjourned 3 times since November and has been in hearing for over a year. So I just have to say that this will be our last adjournment, and the applicant must appear at the next scheduled hearing.
Item number 3, 23501BZ, 2009 Mermaid Avenue, Brooklyn. With a request for an adjournment.
For 4 weeks, and ditto for this one. The case has been adjourned 3 times since December and has been in hearing for almost a year. So again, this is the last adjournment, and the applicant must appear in the next hearing.
New cases. Item number 4, 7-57BZ, 2317 Ralph Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, because it's a new case, I'll note that we have proof of notice of hearing to officials, but I actually don't find proof of service of the initial application to officials in our folder. However, the community board heard the application. That happens a lot where we don't see the proof of initial service. But
I'll look for it, but I'm pretty sure it's there.
The community board 18 recommends denial on this. The reasons are that it is that the reasons for that are incomplete in their submission because they use one of those sort of scroll down systems that we can't really go through. So I actually can't see what they do. But it has to do with ongoing non-compliances with board conditions, so it'd be good to have more on that. The site has a hazardous materials restrictive declaration, but it appears that according to DEP, its requirements were not triggered by the unapproved conversion of the service bays to the convenience store. But there are monitoring wells on the site, so I'd like to know what the current status of the environmental cleanup is. I'd also like to know if clearly the building is not operating in accordance with the approved BSA plans, why would the architect certify on the compliance sheet that it does, and certify and sign and seal that? It makes no sense. You're supposed to be certifying under essentially risk of licensure, right? So the photos, in terms of the condition of the site, the photos show the fence slatting in need of replacement. There's a lot of extraneous signage that didn't get included in the signage calculations, but it's sort of plastered with signs, right? Yeah. And I'd like to understand the situation with the closed storage bins and other temporary shed structures. Those all have to be removed. There was graffiti on the fencing in the photographs. I don't know about it, the site visit. They should also, because when they submitted this to DOB for approval of a convenience store, and DOB gave them a permit, but when you see the permitting drawings, the convenience store was very small. It was only a couple of the service bays, not all of them. Now it has all of the service bays, and there's a Dunkin' Donuts in it, so I don't know if it actually complies with the standard maximum for area on convenience store. They should also show on the plans the location of the temporary storage containers to be removed. So there's a lot of things on the site that all has to show as a dash line on the plan saying storage container to be removed. And of course it needs to be removed before we vote.
Don't they have to be, I thought that those storage containers need to stay until
because
the air.
Oh, those, yes, that's correct, those containers, right.
Yeah.
So there's 2 kinds of containers. They have some like wooden sheds and things like that, and some boxes, but then they have the ones that are for the monitoring wells. Or maybe they're for storage temporarily while, I don't really understand what's in the storage sheds, but we've seen those for monitoring wells where they have equipment. And And so those do need to be shown on the plans and give us an idea of when it's going to be removed, like how much longer is their monitoring needed. Also, there isn't any planting that was required by the prior approvals. I'm just wondering whether that's something that we should discuss. And all removals and repairs have to be done before we vote, as I say. Right, this isn't the one that didn't install there. Yeah, okay.
Just want to add that parking spaces need to be restriped. The pavement condition is not in good shape, and I'm assuming it's partly also because of all the DEP work that's going on. So at the completion of that, we should ensure that the pavement has been improved. There were more vehicles parked on the site than the striped, and I need to understand that. I'm wondering if those are the vehicles related to the maintenance, with regards to the testing. I don't know, but just from the photos, it looked like there were more vehicles and the number of striped spaces allocated. So just would like some clarification on that.
I agree with you that they need to show that they meet the guidelines of the TPPN 1099 in terms of the square footage of the selling area, and they need to show that on the plans as well as the calculations. And I had a question about the big coffee cup on the roof. It's not a sign.
It is a sign.
You know, and then they have to find out how to measure that and put that on. Plans and the analysis.
Seems it would not be compliant.
Yes, there is
They
a
claim it was, but it's in compliance with 36 to whatever.
There are a lot of banners along the fencing, so this need to be cleaned up.
Okay.
Okay, that's it? Thank you. Item number 5, 30305BZ, 428 East 75th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, again, a new hearing, so we have proof of service of initial application to officials, but I don't find proof of notice of hearing to officials, or at least the certificates of mailing that were provided. I mean, there were some floating certificates of mailing. They don't show clear dates, and they're not connected to any particular materials, so they're just sort of floating there. You can't really tell if it was sent right before the hearing. I've been noticing that most of the certificates of mailing don't have a date stamp on them, and or the critical part of the date is missing. Like, you can see it's a stamp, but it doesn't. You can't see the date, so they have to be carefully stamped. Community Board 8 recommended approval. There is an application. The application is for an extension of term, but more importantly, it's actually for a modification to the variance to modify the use from PCE to use group 9 and extend the use group 9 dance studio use further into the non-conforming building that has existing use group 6 uses. I'm not really sure if they don't mention, but it could be that they also propose to expand into the vacant veterinarian office, and they don't say, but it's vacant. They should provide sprinkler and alarm inspection reports. The fire department should review for egress and safety, since this use was never reviewed or permitted by DOB, and I'm actually not sure you have adequate egress. In fact, other than obtaining permits to install HVAC and sprinklers, no work in this building ever received permits, even after the initial approval. So I don't understand how a C of O can be obtained now that the work is complete and none of the tradespeople are on the job, or, that always makes it extremely difficult to get a C of O because the electrician doesn't work there anymore, the plumber doesn't work there anymore. In a statement of facts, they need to correct the number of classes taught. It's 20 a day, not per season. The statement of facts is also rather confused about the 2007 amendment letter's scope. It alternately states that the expansion was approved by letter, and then that the expansion didn't occur until 2012. Since there was no permits obtained, it's hard to know when the expansion occurred. They seem to imply that the letter also allowed a change of use from PCE to use group 9, which I doubt would have been done by letter. The letter doesn't state that anyway, nor does it state that the expansion of the use was permitted. No floor plans from that letter were provided, so the applicant really does need to go back and to the folders, to the file, and provide the board with the materials that were submitted in 2007 that resulted in the issuance of that substantial compliance or letter of no objection. I'm not sure which one it was. For me, the big issue was, is because this was a variance for PCE, was the 2006 variance the minimum necessary to afford relief? And if yes, have circumstances changed since then such that a further variance is warranted? Because the ground floor uses could have been changed, had changed as of right, even though they never filed a permit, but they changed as of right to use group 6. So I don't know why a change from manufacturing to use group 6 isn't an adequate change to afford relief, as of right. So the applicant needs to also, as was requested in the notice of comments, systematically and in organized fashion go through each and every prior finding and explain how the requested amendment comports with the original findings. Also, since the dance school is a tenant, we have to look to the economic viability of the building, not the tenant's business or programmatic needs, which was discussed a lot in the statement of facts. The applicant also cites to a prior BSA decision that allowed the expansion of a Use Group 9 dance studio into an existing Use Group 6 space, but does not explain how its situation is similar to the situation that led the board to decide in favor of that application. So just sort of gives us the application, but doesn't tell us what we're supposed to do with that. They also need to provide egress calculations for the first and second floors, because there's only one means of egress from the second floor, and I'm not sure that's allowed.
I think in the case that they referred to, the use was as of right, because I think there was a commercial overlay over that building, whereas here, it is not. It's an R8B in need of a variance. So I think that's a distinguishing factor that they have to address.
The Use Group 6 use wasn't as of right, yeah.
My memory of it was, yes, was that in the other building, it was an overlay on a one-story plus cellar commercial building that had various retail spaces all along it and also in the cellar. And so it was a totally different situation.
Right.
You didn't have to make a financial finding because the use was as of right. So it's
Right.
just then changing that PCE use into a dance studio, which I believe also might have been allowed.
Yeah, well, so dance studios are Use Group 9, but I can't remember whether that district allowed the Use Group 9. Yeah.
I don't believe there was the same set of facts as this.
Right,
So.
right. And plus, I think it was a situation where the use, it was in the, I'm pretty sure the expansion was in the cellar, right?
Right, and it had a first floor storefront though.
Already,
And then
yes.
it went down into the cellar.
Right. Okay. Anything else? Sure, Sean? No?
Item number 6, 2606BZ, 145 East Service Road, Staten Island.
Okay, again, it's a new hearing, so we have proof of service of initial application to officials and proof of notice of hearing to officials. Community board recommendation doesn't specify, they have, the approve and deny box. They never checked one of the boxes, so I don't know whether everyone voted in favor of denial or in favor of approval. So they should clarify whether the proposed modifications result in an increase in floor area in the PCE. It's just not clear. And they need to provide proof of sprinkler and fire alarm installation, inspection, and sign-off, since this is an extension of term.
Just with regards to it, I believe the community board did vote in favor. This was a follow-up confirmation, I think, that contract.
Okay, so, but we don't have any kind of note to the file or anything like that. We didn't get an updated community board recommendation.
I did, I sent you that email.
But so the file, if there's an email, it needs to go into the folder?
I might have been, I double check, but I definitely seem to I thought of it anyway.
Okay, so it needs to go into SharePoint as, like Jello's been doing it as a notice to commissioners, for example. She could show you what, and also Jonathan's been doing that. Okay.
Item number 7, 4107 BZ, 450 West 17th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, again, it's new hearing. We have proof of notice of hearing to officials, but I don't find proof of service of the initial application to officials in the file. However, we do have a community board recommendation, so that kind of usually we give away that they did provide service. I just didn't find it. All right, so. Okay. Okay, so, you know, what I do is, I think we kind of have to have like some formal folder where we know it's in that folder. They kind of move around a lot.
To do with uploading files, it's.
Okay.
It's not.
Okay.
Yeah, it's there.
So the Community Board 4 recommends denial, and that's because the PCE is located in a building with affordable housing units, and they wanted proof from the PCE operator that memberships would be offered at a discount to affordable tenants, but however, the BSA doesn't regulate memberships, so they want to negotiate a little more on their own. That's their business, but we can't get involved in that. They did provide photos of the fire alarm and sprinklers that are installed in the space, and they provided a 2008 fire alarm letter of approval and a DOB letter of completion for the sprinklers. I don't know whether the fire department's satisfied with this because it's from 2008, whether they need to show any more recent inspections, so fire department needs to weigh in. The only thing, my only confusion was they have this floor that's labeled mezzanine, that has two small like yoga studios on it. It appears to be, based on the floor plan, on the same level as the residential units. I mean, how, the supplemental use regulations don't allow you to have a commercial use on the same floor once they got a, you know, some kind of a waiver. I don't know how. Yeah, so they need to explain that because I just don't get how they can have commercial and residential next door to each other. We've seen things where, in fact, we had a PCE like this where one of the floors is for use exclusively by the residents. And so we were told, don't look at that part of the that part of the physical cultural area, because that's for the residents, right? Then it's an accessory use, but.
The notice of hearing is the most current file. Yeah.
No, not hearing, initial service.
That's also there.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
March, yeah. There's just some issues getting that.
Okay.
I think it would be just helpful at some point if we could all have one uniform
Method,
method
yeah,
and we all know where it is.
yeah. Right. It's, yeah, this is something to work on because I scour all the files looking, and maybe it's the last place to look, and I didn't look in the last place.
Well, in this one, it was.
There was a uploading
There's
issue.
offline issues, yeah.
Okay, okay. Okay.
Next. Item number 8, 2110 BZ, 2801 Rolling Avenue, Bronx.
Again, this one we have proof of service of initial hearing to the officials, but no notice of hearing that I could find. We also need a community board recommendation. They should provide a list of open items that are preventing obtaining a C of O because it's been going on for a while, for a long while. The statement of fact disagrees with the drawings, stating there are 2 street trees on each frontage, when the drawing shows 3 street trees on Roebling. I'd also like to know whether the immediate residential neighbors have been informed of this hearing. They should be invited to offer comments. They need to provide information on noise levels. from and the control of the annunciator and menu board and light spread drawings. So the reason to invite the neighbor is obviously, are you being woken up in the middle of the night by somebody ordering a cheeseburger or whatever? The photo shows that the trash receptacle located at the end of the drive-through is located on a city sidewalk. That needs to be moved. Otherwise, from the photos anyway, the site looks clean. They should provide photos of the perimeter conditions of the site all the way along the shared property lines, and photos all the way around the enlarged trash enclosure, and key those photos to a site plan. The request is also to eliminate the planting beds, not planters, as stated in the statement of facts. I don't understand the explanation about fear of rat infestation. Planting beds, if maintained, should not be a rodent problem any more than street tree beds are. And, you know, lots and lots of parks have planting beds. So that's how we grow things in America, or in New York, this part of America. Planting is the amenity that shields the neighbors from the potential nuisance of the drive-through. It helps to alleviate pollution and absorb rainwater runoff. So it's kind of like they're not giving anything back to the community in exchange for having gotten this waiver. And they didn't put in any of the planting beds, even though they're supposed to be all along the perimeter, along Roebling and along the property line.
And the plans, proposed plan also show that.
Right.
So
One of them
it's a little
shows.
confusing.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the existing plan shows there's nothing. Also, the compliance chart states that there's buffering but not planting. I'd like to know what the buffering is. It can't just be a fence. And the trash enclosure is much larger than what was previously approved. That was not mentioned in the statement of facts as one of the changes. It's enormous. I don't really understand why it needs to be so big, but at least it's not a temporary structure. It looks well built. With respect to the request to extend the hours of operation, the original approval allowed hours until 1 a.m., and the subsequent approval extended that to 2 a.m., and now the request is 3 a.m., so neighbors really should be given a chance to comment on that kind of hour creep, even though I understand there's a 24-hour 7-Eleven or something like that in the neighborhood.
I'm sorry.
The 24-hour 7-Eleven doesn't have a drive-through.
Right.
That's major, and it's not right up against the building.
Exactly. It is mostly, it has commercial uses around it, so I'm not sure if it's a consistent comparison.
Okay. Anything else? Thanks.
Go. Item number 9, 46, I'm sorry, you ready? 4610BZ, 1401 Sheepshead Ray Road, Brooklyn. We have a request for a draw, but received an email from the applicant that says we are filing as of right at DOB.
Oh. So this was an extension of time to complete on a reduction in parking. So unless they provide the required parking, I'm not really sure how, you know, I'm reluctant to allow withdrawal and to then retain an illegal condition, right? So maybe we should get a submission on what the approach is going to be so that we're not retaining a legal condition. We've had some of these where the application was either dismissed or withdrawn, and 20 years later, they're continuing to do the same thing. So, okay. And I just want to also correct the calendar. It says that the last hearing on June 6th was postponed. It wasn't, it was adjourned. We heard a brief discussion and then adjourned it. And speakers were invited to speak, so.
Okay.
Okay.
Appeals calendar, decision items. Item number 10, 232-15A, 840 West End Avenue, Manhattan. There's an adjournment request, actually a deferral, because they are still waiting for landmark sign-off, and they have not provided the compliance information that the board had requested,
Right, okay.
co-compliance information. Continued hearing items, item number 11, 2016, 4253A, 565 St. John's Place, Brooklyn. They're requesting a 6-week adjournment. Item number 12, 2016, 4263A, 235 Industrial Loop. They're requesting an adjournment for 3 to 4 weeks.
This is why we don't have a calendar.
So,
Room for people to be
New
here.
cases.
exactly.
Item number 13, 2016, 4268A, 30 Prince Street, Brooklyn.
Okay. So this is, okay, we have proof of service to officials, which is really what is required here on an appeals case, an interpretive appeals case. With respect to the response to the notice of comments, no additional pre-1970 photos were provided, and leases are only post-2003. Their statement of fact states there is a 1980 legalization permit pursuant to application ES 93/30 and a rehab of existing sign permit pursuant to ES 162/85, but those were not provided, and there's no explanation for what that's supposed to mean, what those designations mean. Something from 1930 maybe, but what could it have been? Could have been anything, actually. Arguably, if it was an electric sign permit from 1930, for example, it could have been an electric sign on the ground floor. So we actually don't know where it is. And the other one that was in 85 doesn't help make the case that it's a pre-68 sign, right? So the proofs that were submitted of the existence of the sign pursuant to 42-55C1 must establish that the sign existed as of 1968. The photos from prior to 1968, of which they provided several, unless something wrong with my eyesight, I don't know, we blew it up in blow up and all of that. They don't show that the sign in question existed. Rather, they may be showing, though it's really difficult to see, that a sign of some type was adhered to the face of the parapet wall, like maybe posters or something like that.
Maybe painted words, is what I was
right.
thinking.
Yeah, exactly what I was thinking. Because that's kind of what you see wrapped around on the eastern facade, which seems to have a phone number.
Oh, really? You can see a phone number? Wow.
It's like 3 and a 4.
Impressive.
Kind of, so that's why I'm just kind of guessing it may have been a phone number. So it's like something wrapped around similar, but on this side, it seems like, again, a painted thing.
And it's on the parapet.
On the parapet, which is just 4 foot or 5 foot high.
Right.
So in terms of the size, it's nowhere close to what's
And there's no
existing. And
sign structure, right? And those signs, if indeed they were signs, are not the 1820 square foot sign and structure that we see in place today that rises above the parapets, because that's the other part of it. If it was like another method for arguably, I don't know if that would work either, but installing it right on the parapet in the same place, I don't know if that would work either because it's a new structure and so on, but this isn't almost anything to do with that sign. If that was a painted sign, it doesn't have anything to do with that. So I actually don't see without more how the sign that's 1,820 square feet qualifies for grandfathering under 4255C1. No leases or other proofs were provided to establish the existing sign in 1968, which was what was specifically requested in the notice of comments, and I'm sure at DOB was the same thing, because that's their list of requirements to establish the use. I also don't know what the relevance of the electrical sign permits are, since no copies were provided, I already said that. And then also 42-55C2, which could work because could work arguably because they have a 1978 photo showing the sign in place. But unfortunately, it's inapplicable because there's no indication that in 1979, or today certainly, the sign was less than 1,200 square feet and less than 60 foot long. To clarify sort of the meaning of that section, 42-55C2, because at the beginning I was reading it, and the tenses in the paragraph are mixed. They talk in present and past tense about the dimension, so I thought maybe that gives an opening to what if the sign were too big today, but you made it 1,200 square feet, or it was 1,200 square feet back then, could you bring it back to 1,200 square feet, something like that. But I looked at the 1980 CPC report on this section in the zoning resolution, that when it was created, and it says, by the term advertising sign, the commission intends to include both the message and the structure. Therefore, the relevant dimensions are those of the entire sign, not just the message area. If a sign structure built between 1968 and 1979 is 60 feet in height and 100 feet in length, hence 6,000 square feet, it is not grandfathered by the zoning text amendment, even if the message area measures only 25 by 25. So what that told me was that if the side or the structure are larger than 1,200 square feet from back then or today, it doesn't qualify under the grandfathering. So that, for me, that was the end of the option 2. The applicant also makes no arguments to tie together photos, leases, sign permits, or anything else to establish the subject sign's existence in 1968, and basically just gives us a lot of stuff and hopes that we'll figure it out, which is not really much in the way of advocacy. So, anybody want to add anything to that?
I agree with you. I think as I was reviewing this case, there were two things that I was trying to figure out. One is this an accessory sign or an advertisement sign? That also has not been, like the pre-68 sign, was that an accessory sign or an advertisement sign? That has not been clearly demonstrated through any of the documentations. In those days, the paintings on the wall could have been just the name of the building.
Right.
It could have been just saying, call us here. So there is no way of verifying that. That's one part of it. The second part is, as you mentioned, the size of the sign and the location of the sign. Very clearly, between the photos that were provided from 1978 and 1970, the sign went from what seemed like was on the parapet to a structure over the parapet on the roof. So therefore, it's definitely not a sign that existed pre-1968. The sign structure did not, that sign structure did not exist pre-68. And therefore, I just do not see how any documentations thus far provided to us, which is the same set of documents that were provided to DOB, could justify why this should be grandfathered. And I have a question for DOB, which is, I'm just curious why initially they approved it under the C2, the 4255 C2, and what they,
Yeah,
I'm
who
just
knows,
curious.
the registration of signs, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of signs, all had to be registered by a certain date. So I'm just guessing that they worked in that same enforcement way.
Okay.
Because I'm pretty sure the registration included a statement from an architect or engineer that says, I reviewed the sign and it complies with zoning or something like that. Why anybody would sign such a thing, I don't know. But, they may have just relied on the statements of the submitter.
So then that
Yeah,
answers my
I don't
question.
know, but, that's why they're now looking at the sign, right, because it
So-
comes up.
Yeah, like you said, I just don't think the applicant has provided adequate information at all to justify why they should be grandfathered as an advertisement sign, because I question even whether the sign was an advertisement sign.
Right, okay. Anything you want to add?
And I had a similar view on this as both of you did. So, and I was curious as well as to, what information was actually provided to DOB initially that led DOB to approve it.
And there's no document that was provided regarding that. It's referred to, but nothing.
I think they submitted there was no letter from DOB. I think they submitted the copy of their registration where they have to register all however many hundreds of signs this company owns that fall within that distance. And I think that's what they gave us. Yeah, they didn't give us a copy of the approval, I don't think. Yeah.
Zoning calendar, continued hearing items, item number 14.
Okay.
14. 224-14BZ, 225-14A, 1534 Victory Boulevard, Staten Island.
Okay. Just going down here. Okay, so the first thing is that we actually didn't have a full hearing about this on July 25th. We were asked to adjourn at that hearing, although Commissioner Shonda presented one additional question at the hearing about on-site parking impacts, or sorry, off-site parking impacts. And so in response to that one question, we had a recent submission by the parking consultant to discuss the off-site parking impacts. So we did go through our comments prior to the July 24th hearing. I don't know whether we need to repeat them. I don't think we do, they're already on the record, right? So I'll just add a little bit I have from in response, and also Commissioner Otley Brown hadn't had a chance then to review the financials, so she'll have new comments. So the parking consultant submitted a recent letter explaining why the proposal will not have an impact on existing parking conditions in the area, mostly because it's not supposed to be an increase in utilization. It's just supposed to ease utilization. Let's see, and then we did get a whole new letter from Borough President Otto on this just a couple of days ago, who continues to oppose the plan, which I'll read. It says, I write in opposition to the revised plan filed for the referenced application and reiterate all concerns previously forwarded to the board. It is my belief that the existing non-conforming use group 4A ambulatory diagnostic treatment healthcare facility situated in an R12 zoning district cannot be enlarged. Enlargements in this case include expansions to other open portions of the zoning lot not previously used for such activities and are only permitted pursuant to section 52-40 of the zoning resolution. The addition of new required accessory off-street parking spaces for existing non-conforming uses up to but not more than the number required by the applicable district regulations, while permitted, are specifically not included in the off-street parking regulations of 5241 for community facility uses in R1 districts. Additionally, 5241 restricts expansions to the same zoning lot which supports the vested undesired use. I believe that the wording of the same refers to exactly that. It is highlighting the fact that the zoning lot may not be different. To that end, I believe all aspects of this proposal that attempts to increase the non-conforming use or zoning lot area supporting it should be disapproved. The BSA will be establishing a dangerous precedent in determining that the parameters of an existing zoning lot supporting non-conforming use can be expanded to include new lot area which currently supports a conforming and complying use. And then closing. Anybody? So, Commissioner Otley Brown, you want to go through your...
So I just wanted to state by saying that I had originally stated that I felt that this situation of merging the subject lot with the adjacent lot and then calling it a unique hardship because it's a deep flag lot was actually a self-created hardship. And they attempted to address my issue, but I'm not satisfied with their response. They basically said that the existing variance lot has a lot width of 81 feet and that it's insufficient to accommodate the parking maneuverability for the 16 spaces allowed. They then cite a BSA case that says that they recognize that a hardship that's caused by the lot coverage of an existing lawful building does not constitute self-created hardship. But the only problem with that is that this subject case that we're looking at now was resolved by a variance that stated that the 16 spaces were all that were required and that the layout was fine. And so the subject case approved the placement of the building on the lot where it was, as well as the lot coverage. Therefore, the lot's hardship was resolved with the granting of the variance, and I don't see any change in that hardship. So that's the issue that I have with their response to self-created. So that still remains an issue for me. And I guess it's somehow tied in with the A finding also, the uniqueness of this very large flat lot. That being said, if there was a way in which they could get past that, I did review the financials, and that I found that the financials are unnecessarily complicating the situation. Like before, what they're doing is they're valuing the vacant land differently for each lot, even though both lots are the same zoning and they're side by side. In fact, the actual land value for the medical office is higher, even though it's a smaller lot, than the lot that has the home on it. So what they really need to do is simplify it. They need to highlight two major issues, and one is that the construction costs of both scenarios, either the as-of-right that has the medical office with 16 spaces and the two homes versus the proposed medical office 24 spaces and the two homes, that the construction costs for both would be minimally different. And I'm giving them maybe the addition of slightly more pavement for the parking or paint used to stripe that parking. And that's really basically the only difference. So it costs just about the same to develop both lots. And the other thing they need to highlight is that because the medical office with 24 spots provides more parking on site and better maneuverability, they probably could get a better rent for it. And they do show that in these financials. And the difference between the existing medical office of 16 with 16 spaces versus the proposed with 24, they get a difference of from $22 a square foot for the as-of-right to $27 a square foot for the proposed. And those are the two things that they should be highlighting. And they should be basically saying that the proposed is feasible because of the better layout and the extra parking spaces versus the existing. They are totally complicating the scenario, and the result is that message is lost in the complication. So the complication, the way in which they're switching the lot square footages for each scenario, which they do, it's complicating it. The way in which they're valuing the land differently in both scenarios, they're even looking at different units of value, that's also complicating the issue. The message is lost, so.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so, and just as a reminder, and also, I'm still having trouble with the A finding. I still don't see how this lot suffers from this when they have the required amount of parking. Zoning determined that that was the required amount of parking. They provided it. I don't know how you get to an A from there. If you wanted to add anything. I know we read our comments last time, but yeah.
I don't have any addition.
Okay.
Item number 15, 24014BZ, 1620 Shore Boulevard, Brooklyn.
Okay. This application's gone through a long process, mostly because of that easement argument. So I think that what they submitted this time was really addressing the concerns we had. In particular, they clarified to show that the existing first floor joists and the first floor wall studs will be elevated. Those ones will be elevated to reach the FRCE, so the design flood, or above the freeboard, with new material to be added as necessary for reinforcement, but not to remove the existing material. And that they provided a very helpful rendering, which I'd really like to use as a model among the various renderings, that shows that the project fits within the height and scale of the immediate neighborhood. So I thought that they did a good job of that. And in the previous hearing, we talked about the rear yard, where they're lining up the rear with the neighbor's rear walls. So then that's completely respectful of the condition of the neighbors. In connection with this, we always have a condition that the removal of existing structure in excess of what's shown on the drawings voids the special permit. And in this case, that's quite tricky, so the contractors have to know that they can't mess with the lift, right? Anybody else? Yeah. Okay.
Item number 16, 2515BZ, 71 Lewis Avenue, Brooklyn. We have an adjournment request.
A long one, they want to go till February.
Item number 17, 17215BZ, 14645 22nd Avenue, Queens.
Okay. Just, the May 16th hearing was adjourned to allow time to amend the project. I don't think that was notated. It wasn't marked as an adjournment. We didn't have a hearing. So we last heard this application in December, and there have been 2 adjournments. The plans were revised to reduce the scope of the waivers. A waiver of the front yard regulations is still requested, as is a waiver of the minimum dwelling unit size. The drawings represent that a floor area increase of 300 square feet is permitted here because a garage is being provided under section 23-142C. However, unless I'm misreading this bonus is only available to detached and semi-detached buildings, as that's defined in section 1210. And the proposed project is a 0 lot line building, so it can't take advantage of this 300 square foot waiver, unless DOB is approaching it in a way that I don't know how to read. At the last hearing, we asked for a substantiation that 1, a 15-foot wide building that could be constructed as of right would not be viable, 2, that 2 families are typical of the area, and 3, while 1 family wouldn't suffice, therefore obviating the need for the dwelling unit size waiver. The area study provided appears to make a case that 16-foot wide buildings are incredibly common in the neighborhood, so that sounds like the case is actually for a 16-foot wide building, but the proposed project is 18-foot wide. So a 16-foot width, if permitted in this case, would only reduce the front yard to 9 feet deep, where it's required to be 10 and not 7 feet deep as requested. If, on the one hand, as the applicant claims, a 15-foot wide home is not adequate, then why should a 900 square foot dwelling unit be desirable or adequate if city planners, in studying what should be a minimum apartment size, determined that 925 square feet is the minimum reasonable unit? So that seems to contradict. So if you're willing to go under for individual apartments, why can't you be under for a 15-foot wide home, which other people have? In fact, a neighbor came to testify last time and said that he lives in a 15-foot wide home and it's fine. And then just a couple other things. A chart of 2 family homes in the area was provided, but with a cover letter stating that 1 families predominate, so it's not like there aren't lots of 1 families in the neighborhood. In fact, there are more, even though it's clear there's 2 families.
Did they give numbers? Because I was looking everywhere for total number of homes, then
No.
total number that were 2 family versus 1 family.
No, they didn't.
Yeah, so to me, that whole argument, if we can't follow behind them
Right.
and see how they made the determination, then to me, that's not a study.
Right, no, that's true. The July submission also states that a 2-family here is needed to offset the cost of construction. But a 2-family actually has more construction costs than a 1-family since it needs 2 kitchens. Arguably needs more master bath type bathrooms, so those are more expensive. And there's different egress requirements, plus, unless, I'm not sure how you're doing it, but usually it has to have separate HVAC systems, separate heating systems, so that you can control your own. So actually, this is a more expensive building to build, and so I don't understand that as a justification rationale. Those are my comments.
I just want to correct, in the statement of fact, the latest statement of fact, the applicant did indicate the number of two-family homes.
Not out of the total
Out of the
study.
total.
The question is the total study.
Yeah.
They said there are 72 family homes on lots that are 25 feet wide or less.
Right.
Out of how many?
Right.
Are there 5,000?
One bedroom?
Yeah, we don't know. So to me, that's not really addressing the issue.
Right.
So, I mean, I actually agree with the chair on this case completely, and I still remain resolute about the fact that a 1-family home is actually appropriate for this lot, and if they would just address the issues that I rose about the way in which they designed this 1-family home to show that it wouldn't work, it would actually work.
Right.
1,500 square feet is a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, it's small, but it's a small home on a small lot. And that could be a starter home for somebody, a 3-bedroom home.
And in this neighborhood, that's the standard, these small homes. They show, that map I thought was extremely telling. If they're all 16 feet and it proves that there's no such thing as a 15-foot wide home, maybe that's a different subject, but then we're just getting to 16 feet, so.
Right.
Anything else?
I actually thought it was interesting in the way the chart, the map that was shown, and the applicant clearly accepts that, is that there is a prevalence of two-family homes, but most of... prevalence of one-family home. And, but that most of the two-family homes that are located, and I just did a quick look at the Pluto data, most of these are pre-60s buildings. So it's very likely they are probably not complying with many of the regulations that is in place today under an R3A in terms of the dwelling unit size. Definitely, I think the neighborhood studies have indicated that there's a significant number of lots that are non-complying when it comes to yards and other regulations. So this is a very unique site in that way. There aren't any vacant corner lots except another one that are narrow. And for it to provide a complying as of right, the zoning allows as of right 2 dwelling units. And to provide an as of right 2 dwelling units here, one will not be able to meet the 925 square foot per dwelling unit requirement anyway, because of the way the configuration would have to be.
Right.
And so I think just from that point of view, the hardship is kind of...
No, but who says you have to have a two-family? A hardship is supposed to be, again, that the zoning requires you.
But here we're not measuring the financial part of it, right? Because...
No, it's always the same. A variance is for a unique physical condition that deprives you of the ability to make a viable use of the property, right? Whether it's your own home or whether it's being sold for income-producing purposes.
In terms of the viable use, I mean, a two-bedroom, a 2-dwelling unit is permitted here.
But that's not the same thing as a viable use. A one-bedroom, a one-family...
Had it been an interior lot, probably it would have been viable because they would not have to provide the front yard waiver.
They can build a 0 lot line here, which is what they're showing, right?
But they
Whereas you-
they have a lot that is set back from the front because they have to meet the lot depth of the abutting property of 19 feet, which also compromises in terms of the layout and the configuration of the units. It also requires a setback from 22nd Avenue. So it does minimize the ability to have a reasonable size unit laid out.
But, so that's the part that I'm confused. Sometimes we have lots that are 20 feet, right, or even less. We have lots that are 16 feet. Then they show us a house that's as of right, that's 4 feet wide or something. That's an unviable lot. You can't build a one-family, can't build a two-family, can't build anything, right? That's not the situation here. This is the choice. I want to build two-family, and I can't for 2 reasons. One, because I want the lot to be wider. I wish the lot were wider. And 2, because I want to build substandard units. Why shouldn't I be allowed to build substandard units? That's the other part that I don't get.
That's the key, because even if you have an interior lot, you're going to run up against that because your lot size.
Right.
You're going to, so it has nothing to do with interior or cornerage. You're just limited because of the size of your lot.
Right. And, on the one hand, you could say public policy is encouraging smaller and smaller units, but I don't know if that's the board's job to encourage smaller and smaller units. That's city planning to say we're not going to use the 925 as the minimum standard anymore.
Yeah, it was kind of, there is an incongruence with the zoning district and the 925 cap, especially for lot sizes that
No, because it's encouraging on families. That's what it seems to be doing.
But then it's allowing, the zoning allows two-family unit also, that means.
Then you need to have a
Your
lot.
lot, that's the key.
It's just simply that unless all the math works, you get one choice. If none of the math works, you get a variance. Right? But the math is working as far as I can tell. We get variances sometimes where they ask for a 15-foot wide house. They only have 11. All they want is 15, something they want even less.
That is true. We have seen those cases.
Yeah.
Item number 18, 2016-3BZ, 1212 Victory Boulevard, Staten Island. There's a request for an adjournment for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Item number 19, 2016-4262BZ, 279 Church Street, Manhattan. There's a adjournment request.
This one's to install the fire alarm. That one I guess is still not finished. But it's terrible because on the one hand, makes for a lighter hearing, but that's not the goal. So all of these applicants who are waiting months and months to go on now the October calendar, didn't need to wait months and months. Okay.
New cases, item number 1, 8715BZ, 182 Minna Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, so there was a request here to postpone the hearing, but actually, we thought that that would be a very bad thing to do. There's an enormous amount of opposition on this case. The case was noticed, it was published in the paper. There are many, many people interested in the case, and the idea of postponing the hearing and effectively having people come here and then it's not heard seemed really a deprivation of rights. So we're going to go ahead with reading our comments and having a hearing tomorrow. The applicant doesn't necessarily have to respond to our comments right before our very eyes. They can say we're going to respond in writing and take a long adjournment. They advised us by letter that they're going to be working something out with the community, so I hope that they take a good opportunity to really work things through. But I actually thought that our comments will be informative because the thorough review that the commissioners and staff give to the application is different than what the community is able to do because they don't have the professionals necessarily available to them. So I think we should read all of our comments about this. So in terms of the hearing, we have proof of the initial filing of the application to officials. And again, I didn't find, but it's probably there. No proof of notice of hearing, although we do have letters from neighbors, many of them, all done on the BSA comment form. Community Board 12 voted narrowly to approve with 16 in favor, 7 against, 5 abstaining, and 2 recusals. We have a letter of opposition from Assembly Member Brennan. I didn't find anything from Councilmember Lander in the folder, but I know that he's very concerned about this application. We have approximately 70 letters of opposition from mostly Minna Street residents, but also from Chester Avenue and 12th Avenue residents concerned about parking, safety, congestion, and the size of the building in context of the neighborhood character. Fire department's comments were that it requires full sprinklering and an interior fire alarm system, and states that the egress door width does not meet code. The minimum is 32 inches. My review of the drawing shows that there are other places where fire code is not met, doors that swing in the opposite direction of travel, and some passageway openings that are under 32 inches, and storage closets are not permitted to open into a fire stair, which seems to have been a design standard in the building, which surprised me. As explained in the statement of facts, this school is affiliated with another school located approximately 4 blocks from the subject site at 1247 38th Street. The statement of facts does not, however, mention that 38th Street school was the subject of a 2010 variance, plus an amendment in 2011, and is currently before the board for a further amendment, seeking to legalize changes made without board approval and currently under construction. That school is represented by different counsel, and its statement of facts makes no mention of the subject application. The 38th Street building was initially approved as a K-12 school with 99,000 square feet, was amended in 2011 to 102,000 square feet on a larger zoning lot for 120 staff and 1,500 students, and is presently under construction in spite of the absence of BSA approval, further enlarging the zoning lot and the building now to 117,000 square feet. So that's an 18,000 square foot enlargement since the original approval. And in the latest version of that school, the K-12 school is being amended to K-9 without the statement of facts describing where the 10th to 12th graders are going. We noted that at the initial hearing on that application on June 9th, that it was very obvious that the large kitchens and dining halls will also function as commercial catering spaces that are not eligible for school deference under the Cornell doctrine, and that they should be treated as commercial uses in the application materials, which is a permitted use in the M zoning district. Although neither statement of facts ties these two applications together as they should have done, the current application for the subject site describes this site as being for 9th to 12th graders, where 4 classrooms for 65 students, or an entire floor of the proposed building is devoted to that grade. Meanwhile, 7 classes of 9th graders, or 210 students, are already being proposed to be located at the 38th Street building, where the 8th grade only has 4 classes and 120 students, so I'm not sure why you get so many 8th graders all of a sudden increases in the 9th grade by effectively 11 classes. And we had some quick submission from the applicant explaining that a 9th grader isn't really a 9th grader, they're really an 8th grader, or maybe they're a 10th grader, or I don't even know what. But nevertheless, it doesn't work with the math, because if you have only this many 8th graders and they graduate to the 9th grade, why do you need so many of any of those other things? So it just doesn't make any sense. So as I see it, we have duplicate, if not nearly triplicate programs, and at least 1 floor of the subject building is unnecessary. And given the interconnectedness and interdependence of these 2 new school buildings, I think their travel separately as separate applications, represented by separate counsel, is improper segmentation, perhaps even under seeker, and certainly prevents the board from making accurate findings under Section 7221. So going forward, they need to be heard together. They're always going to travel in tandem. And I'm not sure what that does now with the request to adjourn, so we're going to have to keep them traveling, and maybe both sides of council have to appear at both hearings. I'm not really sure how we're going to deal with this, but the programmatic needs analyses and the EAS need to be revised to address the school's needs in their totality. The next hearing for 38th Street is actually in 2 weeks, so we need to figure out how we're going to keep Minna in track with that. In part because 38th Street is being constructed as we speak. There were instructions to remove improper construction, which has not been done. As of like a week ago, they were in construction. We were told they could remove that material in 3 days, so 3 days have long since come and gone. Okay, the existence of the other school building that provides more than ample space for the 9th graders calls into question also much of the programmatic requirements in the subject school. I understand that there's a desire for 3 classes each of 10th to 12th grades. However, now capacity for the multi-purpose spaces is reduced and classroom requirements are reduced, so the lesser variants move closer to meeting the need. And again, on 38th Street, the project went from 99,000 to 117,000 square feet. So even if there's some strange math that has to do with how you handle this upper class, there's room in that other building for that upper class, and there isn't room on this tiny little site for all the stuff that they want to put there. So with respect to this height of the study hall, for example, the 38th Street building The site of the study hall, which they claim in the application needs to be 18 feet high. The height of the study hall at 38th Street building has a 4,800 square foot study hall for a permitted occupancy of 244 students, and it has 13-foot to 15-foot high ceilings, depending on where you sit in that space. The subject study hall is 3,500 square feet, and again, the statement of facts claims it has to have 18-foot high ceilings, so such a statement is not supported by the needs of the same school in another location. And then I had time to look up 2 other schools, though we do have some more. At another school that's before us, the study hall is 2,587 square feet with 10-foot high to finished ceilings. So, sorry about the 18 feet, but it's not supported.
Right, but I think it's being driven by that library, the Rabbi
Yes.
Library, which, when you look at the space on that mezzanine, that staircases, plus the 2 staircases from the first floor study hall into that, they're really they've got a lot of dead space, and they're better off getting rid of the mezzanine and putting the books on the first floor along the wall in the
Right.
space where the staircases were, and bring the ceiling height down to a reasonable amount, and then also adjust the ceiling heights of the classroom floors as well.
Right, good idea. And that's, by the way, what we see in many schools. And the ones that we visited, where the room is absolutely lined with books, which makes actually more sense, because we also look at the size of that library. They say, all the kids go up there and research it, but there's only like room for 6 seats to sit at one of those tables. So how's that work? And then the other part of it, they call it the library, maybe that's a misnomer, but one of the explanations for why they needed 18-foot high ceilings is because the students shout at each other. So, which I get, debate and all that stuff, but then when you go to a library, you want it to be quiet, but this is open to below. So actually, it looks much more to me like the mezzanine level of a synagogue. It's labeled as a synagogue. It's referred to sometimes in the statement of facts alternately as a synagogue, as a study hall, as a, things like a library. And it has a bima. This is not a synagogue. This is a school. It has to look like a school. It cannot double as a synagogue because the building can't handle it. And again, the building is clearly too large for the location, being at least twice the height of all of the other buildings on this narrow, very residential block. As proposed, it would never meet the neighborhood character finding, as is demonstrated clearly in the building height study diagram that shows only one building within 1,000 feet of the site over 5 stories, and that building is located on a commercial street and towers over the neighborhood. So it proves that a tall building would tower over the neighborhood without even having to do any kind of a digital rendering, right? So, and then I also ask, in terms of exacerbating the height issue, why does the first floor have to be located 5 feet above grade? You could excavate deeper if you want a deeper cellar for that multi-purpose room. So let's see, the residential, also, I think that the expansion into the side yards is also unreasonable given the neighboring situations, and the lesser variance and the as-of-right show that you could actually do that, provide at least some kind of side yards, 4 to 5 foot side yards, and you'd still get what you need, especially now that you don't have as many kids in the building. We also see many schools where only dairy is served, if cooked on-site, and because they have a very large commercial kitchen. It's labeled commercial kitchen for meat and dairy, right? So it's doubling the size of the kitchen. And so we do see many schools where they serve only dairy to reduce the size of the kitchen. We also see many schools with food that's delivered from outside sources, with heating, like prep kitchens that are much smaller. In this case, the school has a much larger building under construction located only 4 blocks away with a real commercial kitchen suitable for catering for large quantities. And so it seems to me that kitchen should be the source of the food prep. And so they can't say that it's costing us too much money because we have to hire outside caterers. They can do it themselves. And then they could have the warming kitchens. And the classroom floors already show warming kitchens on each floor. So the purpose of the lunchroom really isn't clear. If those rooms are to be used for teachers, as is stated in the statement of facts, which is a very unusual program, that's the first time I've seen a kitchen on every floor for the teachers. I just don't get that. Why can't the teachers be monitored? I thought teachers monitor students when they eat. So aren't they down in the lunchroom when the students are eating? Otherwise, they're eating by themselves. I don't really get that. Or you provide one place, like in most places, where the faculty has a lounge and it has a microwave or whatever, and there's one of them. There isn't one on every floor. Also, I mean, everything is like outsized on this building compared to what we see on many projects. The trash calculations, for instance, that are always provided that show, we're providing this teeny little area for the trash. It shows that only 2 cubic yards of refrigerated storage space is required, but it provides 50 cubic yards. What, handle the trash of everybody on the block? I mean, I don't understand that. So, there's also an extraordinary number of toilet rooms and sinks in this facility, especially at the cellar. When we see many sinks in the lunchroom, they are distributed within the lunchroom itself, and not in a separate sink area. So it really feels like the design was designed to expand to the full edges of the property instead of looking at what does the zoning allow me to do and where do I need to push it out a little bit in order to enable a little bit better function. The statement of facts, as I just said, also alternately describes the lunchroom as a second synagogue. I don't see the need for 2 synagogues for 10th through 12th graders. With 195 students, that's 65 per class. The rated capacity for the first floor is 238 persons, and for the cellar is 182 persons. So that far exceeds the quantity of people in the building. The cellar space could be enlarged with more efficient planning and by eliminating the commercial kitchen. The As-of-Right building, for example, accommodates 191 persons in the synagogue large study hall, so is close to meeting the program demand with a little bit better planning, like eliminating that staircase, for example. The room labeling on the drawings needs to be coordinated with the statement of facts because it's all over the place. I'm not sure what things are for, really. With respect to the mezzanine, I think we talked about that already. The site's too small to accommodate multiple purposes, which it seems to be trying to do, like also having a catering facility, also being a synagogue. It can't be all those things. Okay, and also, if entire grades study together in the study hall, then there isn't simultaneous occupancy of the classroom, which is actually what it says on the classroom chart. The chart shows 7 classrooms occupied only 2 hours per day. So then I ask, why can't the classrooms be designed with movable partitions to accommodate small study halls, as is being shown for the 9th graders? Then you actually don't need to worry about having a large study hall. You could accommodate this by just using kind of modern construction techniques. Also, what happens in the lunchroom when it's not being used for meals? There are 4 hours each day when it's empty. In general, I think I already said that part, that the building's too big. I could see that, once the building's brought down, I could see there might be a little bit of give in the rear yard, because the rear yard backs up against commercial use, which is currently a gas station, or an abandoned gas station. But not a lot of imposition on the rear yard, because you want to be respectful of the neighbors, but it's holding the rear yard line, even though it's expanding too much on the sides. I think it should do the opposite. They need to provide elevations of all 4 sides of the building. And I don't see a programmatic need anywhere for many of the offices and storage rooms. It's like lots and lots of fluff on this site. There is the statement of fact says there's no proposal to use the roof as a rec area. That needs to be verified. It would be totally not good to use a roof as a rec area in this very, very residential, quiet neighborhood. I noted that that Minna is an extraordinarily narrow street, much narrower than what we usually see these schools on. So traffic and there's parking permitted on both sides, and traffic already has a hard time getting down the street. So if there's a delivery truck stopping for the school, or a bus,
Garbage.
or a garbage truck, then there's no way to accommodate parent drop-offs or whatever. The applicant says that the students are in walking distance to the school. That didn't seem to be observed by sort of the character of the community on Minna Street. So they need to show us on a map where their students are located generally, or what blocks they're located on, and how they're going to be dealing with the huge congestion that would be caused by truck deliveries and school drop-offs and all that stuff. Also, the EAS doesn't consider the impacts on pedestrian circulation, traffic, parking, or otherwise. The proposal has more than 200 pedestrian trips during peak hours, so I thought that triggers at least an initial study. The site is also adjacent to a recently closed garage, from which we were informed by neighbors that the tanks were recently observed to have been removed. The surroundings, the site are automotive repair facilities that include spray booths that may affect air quality or subsurface conditions for the tanks, and a phase 2 is therefore probably required. The June 8th notice of comments requested that a number of environmental concerns be addressed, which let's see, there are quite a lot of them. I won't read them because there are a lot, and I'll give it to the next.
I think you raised most of my concerns, and I agree with you in terms of the segmentation of the two facilities, and need to have a better understanding of the programmatic elements in both of these facilities, and how some of the program elements, if it can be shared, that can minimize what is being proposed at the subject site. Also with regards to both, with regards to the as-of-right and the lesser variance, in the proposed, the cellar extends from lot line to lot line, whereas in the as-of-right and the lesser variance, it does not. So by allowing for a full lot coverage cellar, I think some of the spaces that we are recommending being eliminated can be recouped in that, and further allow for reduction in the building height. Similarly, with regards to the massing, it is keeping very much to the front lot line. I think above the ground floor, so it can be set back, because
It's set back 10 feet on the
10
proposal.
feet, but then it continues straight up.
Yes.
And I think it would be more appropriate and more in keeping with the neighborhood if above the ground floor, if the remaining floors of a lower height, as per the lesser variance, is set back from that front wall, and a little bit more encroachment in the rear yard may be more acceptable, since the properties on the rear lot line are all manufacturing uses. So there could be a little bit of a give on that. I agree with the heights, the floor-to-ceiling heights, even for the classrooms, even for the ground floor, much more generous than what we have seen in many of the applications. By reducing some of the floor-to-ceiling heights, I think they can accommodate the programmatic elements in a much smaller building height. And again, I agree with you with the programmatic elements, the way it's stated and how the rooms are laid out are not corresponding, and there is room for flexibility. I'm not sure why 2 study halls are needed. The cafeteria is not being used most of the time. Why can't the cafeteria also serve as a study hall? There are many other ways of optimizing the spaces there, so I would like a much more detailed programmatic needs study.
And I just wanted to add that the cellar not being shown full width on the as-of-right or the lesser is because their cellar is actually 5 feet above grade. So if they dropped it down below grade, then you could do that, right? So,
Yes.
right.
So,
Sorry, go
oh,
ahead.
I didn't know.
No,
Go right ahead.
I can add, I'll come back.
Finish. Go right ahead, finish. Yeah, just finish. I was just going to say that I agree with the chair that it's definitely a space grab, especially when you take into account the sister variance site. And I agree they both need to be brought together, and a decision has to be made amongst the two applicants as to where the actual grades are. And then an analysis of the programmatic needs of both sites has to be done to ensure that the spaces aren't replicated in both different sites, leading to, an explosion of really unnecessary space in both sites. So, and then, as I talked about the height previously, so.
What I would like them to also provide is a cross-section of the building from front to the rear outline. That will also give us a better understanding of the floor-to-ceiling heights. We're kind of inferring from the section that is from the sidewalk to sidewalk.
Right, yeah.
And we do have the proof of hearing.
Say again?
We do have the proof of hearing.
Okay.
It's in the folder.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Item number 2, 2016-4270 BZ, 545th Avenue, Brooklyn, it's a PCE.
Right. So this turns out to be a legalization, opened in November. We do have proof of service of initial filing to neighbors and proof of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. We need community board recommendation. We do have DOI sign off. The fire department sign off was issued before they realized it was a legalization, so it needs to be amended. We need to have proof that the fire alarm and sprinklers were installed, inspected, and signed off, or the fire department has to weigh in on that. The BSA drawings don't indicate that sprinklers will be or are installed. It mentions the alarms, but not the sprinklers. And I don't understand how there's no C of O for this building that apparently was enlarged a long time ago, and it still doesn't have a C of O. It's, for that larger building, it's shown as a one-story building. It's 4 stories. So, don't get it. Go ahead.
I have a question. Because there is residential on the second through penthouse, my question is whether or not there is an amplified sound system here, and if so, what attenuation is in place to protect the residents?
Okay.
I did notify the fire department about legalization, so hopefully.
About the what?
Legalization.
Okay.
So hopefully it won't.
So they do talk about acoustical measures, but maybe because it's a legalization and it just opened in November, there's enough time. They can tell us about how they use sound systems. I'm kind of assuming that they use loud music to encourage people to punch bags really hard. So maybe what we should have them do is notice the upstairs neighbors and let them weigh in on whether this is isn't okay.
Item number 3, 2016-4334 BZ, 341 Nevin Street, Brooklyn. Marking reduction.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial filing and proof of notice of hearing. Community Board 6 voted to approve with 3 noes and 1 abstention. We have 2 letters of objection. I'd like to understand how the 2 at-grade parking spaces work if one of them blocks the elevator access. I just didn't get that at all. The zoning calculations on drawing A10 show something that they label a combined floor area of 10,000 and a maximum permitted floor area of 8,200 square feet. Meanwhile, the gross square feet is 14,200. I don't understand what the combined is versus the maximum. They should provide floor area plan diagrams to show us how they came to the conclusion of their floor area. The photos that were taken in September of 2016 show construction blocking parking spaces on both sides of the street, and on the street parking availability study that was conducted on the same day, that there was also a lot of construction, so that must have affected the parking tabulations, the on-street parking tabulations. So I'm just wondering if the conditions would have been different, assuming they would have been different, if the study was conducted today, would there be more on-street parking available? We need a map that graphically shows on the same map the on-street parking regulations that apply during the time period covered by the map, and availability during the study period. I thought it was really difficult to overlay the two maps, so I actually I could do it with a couple of streets, but I couldn't do it with all of them.
I also found the accompanying chart a little confusing, because if a block said no parking 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Wednesday or Friday, it's still listed as having legal parking spaces and utilized parking spaces during that period of time. So the question was there other parking regulations on that block, and that's why there are still spaces showing. I just found that strange.
I kind of thought they were taking a very conservative approach to the whole parking count. And also factoring in that there is construction going on, so they eliminated a lot of streets in terms of parking, which was an interesting way of approaching the study and indicating how much parking is available and how much needed. So I was satisfied with that. And based on my recent site visit, there is still, if not just around the site, but in the blocks next to it, there is still construction going on. So I think they have done from a parking analysis point of view, I thought they really are on the very conservative side of it.
That's true. And sometimes you want to know that there's more spaces, so you don't feel that you're casting people into no place to park, right? So, also the on-street parking map shows spaces, that's the reason that I say that, because it shows basically no spaces available during the AM and midday peak. And that's why I'm thinking, well, maybe this is skewed so much against in terms of conservative that it's making you a little bit scary that there's no place to park during those peak hours. So I didn't really understand how that observation comports with their conclusion that there's a 42% automodal split in the area. So it sounds like the modal split should be larger, and so that's why if every space is taken more or less, lots and lots of people have cars. So then 42% might be too low of a number, and we certainly know neighborhoods where it's significantly more than that. I also didn't count 60 on-street spaces available in the PM. I only got 47. There are also, and just in terms of remaining issues, open issues on the waterfront revitalization review and LPC review, archaeological review. The phase one also shows upgrading dry cleaner and garages and a brown field nearby and other possible contaminants, so DEP requires a phase two. The DEP letter had a lot of comments that needed to be responded to, and that's where I am on that so far, because I need more on the studies.
Well, I actually had questions about the statement that they made that the parking will be assigned to the employees and no public parking is available. Can they go into detail of what type of offices these are going to be? Are there going to be visitors? Because shouldn't parking study the amount of visitors that are coming to the site as well? So I needed to know that. I also was curious as to what type of businesses would occupy here, what type of offices, because it seems like they're using a local analysis of car ownership, and that suggests that maybe they're going to be drawing local employees from that general area. So I was just curious about that, because if you look at the census tracts, it's even possible that those employees would walk, if that's where they're thinking they're drawing people from. So they should actually just fully address the issue of what's going to be at the site, what types of offices, and who would be likely to visit it.
And in a case like that, though, like we did with another recent medical office where we said this waiver is contingent on this use remaining, this particular user remaining, because in the future, that may be a really parking heavy user, in which case it wouldn't apply.
I mean, I'm not surprised, though, that there are very few spaces available in the midday, because in the general, I mean, this is a little on the outskirts of Park Slope, but Park Slope is like that during the day. You cannot get a parking spot period. You cannot get a legal parking spot until like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's like really difficult to park
Right, so
around.
that means there are a lot of drivers.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people who just own cars and just park them and leave them there for days until they absolutely have to move them.
Right. And they don't use, notably, all those empty spaces in the public parking garages. Okay.
Just a couple of clarification. In the statement of finding, I think the Nevin Street and Carroll Street were being used interchangeably, especially when discussing access to the parking, and so that should be clarified. I would like some clarification on how the parking space will operate, especially with a reservoir space that would be set aside in the cellar area, and then the rest of the parking in the sub-cellar. So as I understand it, 12 will be in the sub-cellar with the reservoir space in the cellar, and remaining 2 on the ground floor. And why wouldn't the ground floor spaces act as reservoir spaces as opposed to the one in the cellar? So I would like a little bit of clarification on how that operation is going to work
I
without
thought the ground floor was going to be reservoir.
There's just two.
They said there are 2 and they're going to be the last to be used.
Then there's
because they'll serve
confusion
as
because
reservoir.
then there's confusion. Then it's saying it's providing total of 14 spaces. 12 of those are being provided in the sub-cellar. The cellar will have 1 reservoir spaces. So that the remaining 2, I'm assuming, are those 2 that are on the ground floor.
Yes, but they said that they would use those last because their demand is low, and so they would serve as reservoir spaces. That was their
They
statement.
would double as reservoir.
Double as reservoir and parking. So then when it's at its max and vehicles have to retrieve, how is that? I just want to make sure that this is not going to result in vehicles sitting on the sidewalk or causing.
Well, if they leave them as parking, then that's what's going to happen, because you can't get to the elevator.
Right.
Right, so that's the part that I didn't understand. I get that those might be reservoir, and you wait till the elevator comes up and then you put them in which case they should be empty most of the time, but not if that's the parking space.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're good? Item number 4, 2017-10BZ, 3411 Beach Channel Drive, Queens.
Okay, another parking waiver. We have proof of service of initial applications to officials and proof of notice of hearing. City Council Member Donovan Richards sent a letter in support. Committee Board 14 voted to recommend denial 24-1, citing inadequate parking and concerns that medical office use will create greater demand. There are 3 open ECB construction violation fines that need to be paid and cured. The HPD regulatory agreement describes a different project than the one proposed here, with 55 parking spaces, 4,500 square feet of commercial, and 5,500 square feet of community facility. I'd like to know whether HPD has agreed to the modification of the project, should the board grant in this case. The parking layout is clearly assuming valet parking, and seems like there is plenty more space for more cars, because we learned how clever the valet parkers are. And it seems like there's a transformer pad that's being located in an optimum place for maneuvering cars and locating cars. I'm wondering why it can't be moved to one of the north corners of the parking lot. They should also provide an east-west section through the parking lot, because all the sections are actually through the apartments. It doesn't tell us how the parking lot works. It seems unfortunate for me, anyway, that the court-facing housing units have only a parking lot to look down onto, and I'm wondering why they didn't suggest a covered parking lot so you could get at least a partial outdoor terrace, which we saw in a project near Fordham Road recently. I'm also curious why the Domino EIS is used here as the basis for the parking study and not for the ambulatory care, and not the DOT 127 per thousand gross square feet standard for medical offices. This is the Rockaways. How is that like where Domino is? It's a completely different demographic, different users, different really everything. And based on the statement of facts Won't this medical facility be used for geriatric care and rehab? Therefore, won't more people arrive by car just by the very nature of who the patients are? With respect to the residential usage rates, shouldn't that be supported by similar housing projects in the area or similar projects in the area operated by the subject owners, subject properties owners? And the reverse journey to work model split data by census tract, I don't think could possibly not be relevant to this type of housing because it's not about reverse journey to work. I think those are my comments.
I actually had similar issue in understanding the parking analysis. It seems like although zoning is saying only 15 parking spaces are required, which is 10% of the 153 apartments, the residential demand is at 18% of the apartments, which means that overnight, the demand is highest with 28 spaces, which is fine at night because the medical offices are closed. But it is problematic during the day because although they are saying when the medical office is busiest, the residential parking demand is only 5 spaces, that's following like a working model where people go to work. Seniors don't have regular working schedules and are not as likely to be moving their cars en masse in the morning and then returning at night when the medical office is closed. So I think they need to adjust their assumptions to accommodate the fact that this is a senior population who probably are not working full-time.
I agree with Commissioner Utley-Brown with regards to the analysis of the parking and the way the analysis was done, the evening being the peak, and I think it's likely there is going to be an overlap in the morning time, given that the senior population may not be using. But I also want to remind everybody that this is senior housing, low-income senior housing, and studies have shown that auto ownership for low-income senior housing is significantly less. So the parking that is being provided is what the zoning requires, not necessarily the utilization of it would be to its maximum. So, and there have been many studies that have been done indicating that the senior housing parking utilization is much lower than what actually is built.
But that's what's obnoxious about that is that's what the parking consultant is supposed to do.
And they're assigning a larger percentage of spots.
Which is kind of like,
Yeah.
which is not helping their argument. And there are
No.
studies that can help them kind of bridge that gap.
They can either go for studies, they can use their own clients' history who develops this kind of housing, and that's what's so frustrating about reading these parking studies, when the consultant doesn't actually look at the project and look at the nature of the project and say, oh, well, you
Athens
know.
are known for affordable housing, senior housing, so they have lots of data they can provide.
Right, but it only works when you ask your client for the data.
They actually did use in their letter, they used a similar affordable housing development, and they said that the utilization rate was 18%.
But 18 is high.
Right, that's higher than the zoning allows.
Yes.
No, the park for the lot on site was 18%.
So that was the utilization of the lot, not the percentage of units that were
I thought it was
generated.
18, then why are they assuming 28 spaces are going to be taken overnight for the residential?
They
if not
didn't
for
use the
applying it?
facility for their parking study, they used it as additional information to show that it's even less
Yeah, I think.
in
that-
actuality.
Right, however, they're applying that 18% number to the total number of dwelling units. 18% of
It shouldn't
153
be that.
dwelling
It should
units is
be the
28
utilization
spaces.
of the spaces. I
Right,
think is
but
what-
they're not.
Yeah.
That's where their error is.
Okay.
They said, let's see, affordable senior housing weekday, 154 dwelling units, daily person trip rate, 3.9%, auto share, 37%. Trips, daily auto trips, 210. That's a lot of trips. That's a lot of trips for 154 apartments.
I And these are independent living senior housing, so it's not like there's going to be a lot of medical care or need individual would need. It would be just the staff related to the medical facility, and then the staff just managing the senior housing. So some of the data is,
They're using census tract data, 252 for senior housing. This is tract data 252.
I think rather
Yeah.
than debating this.
No, I'm just,
Reviewing this, they'll just bring the consultant and we should talk it through, and it sounds like we're directing them to find ways to believably, sort of accurately reduce the demand that we think, is.
well, not find ways to reduce demand, find ways to have the parking study reflect the actual project, because
Well, yeah.
I don't want to predict what the result is.
Sure.
I'm guessing the result, for one, for the ambulatory care will be higher, because you can't use Domino Sugar that
I
only
agree with
uses
that.
37 per thousand, when DOT uses 127.
Although interestingly, a geriatric care facility like this, where seniors who don't drive, right, who may be using Access-a-Ride and other things, I just think that there's probably more layers here that
Yes.
they could give to us that could help sort
Right.
of make this
Right,
case.
but then they could also be dropped off by relatives, and then the relatives wait.
Sure.
Because there's usually more than two, there's often two or more persons in the auto share story, right, to go to the doctor's office, so that's the other part. Okay.
Move on.
Yep.
Item number 5, 2017-11 BZ, 3261 Westchester Avenue, the Bronx.
Okay, this one also is the same, let's see, PCE operator. This is also a legalization that opened just in April. And so we have proof of service to officials of initial filing and notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. There is one letter in support. We need community board recommendation. We have, what?
Yeah, the neighbor recommendation.
And they were okay?
Yes, I got an email from the district manager. They voted unanimously in favor of the project with 36 members present.
Okay.
I can get that email as well.
Okay, yes. We have DOI, and we need an updated fire department sign off because of its legalization. They need to provide proof of alarm and sprinkler installation and sign off. And the BSA drawing doesn't indicate sprinklers on the plan, even though the statement of fact says sprinklers will be installed. Anybody else? Okay.
Item number 6, 2017-24 BZ, 1400 Bay Street, Staten Island.
Okay, we have proof of notice of hearing to the officials and neighbors, but I don't see proof of submission of the initial application, but we do have a CB recommendation, so they must have done that. The community board recommended approval. The photos show the fence slatting is in need of replacement. It shows also lots of strange stuff being stored on the site. Dead cars, all kinds of miscellaneous, I don't know why in a boat, all that stuff has to go. And they need to provide a complete set of BSA-approved drawings. They only show drawing number 3 of 3. That implies there's drawing number 1 of 3 and 2 of 3. And I'm just trying to understand better how this site is used. It's a very generous site considering the uses. I'd like to understand why there's so many parking spaces and what they're for. The photos show many empty spaces. And the reason that I'm asking is because the prior approval didn't require landscaping along the perimeter that's shared with residential uses, and and trying to understand whether the parking spaces could be just split out a little bit, and then you can put in a 3-foot planting buffer. Anybody else?
I fully agreed that there was space where you could either, there's enough maneuverability from the plans that you can move those parking spaces in by 4 feet. And also in the small section next to the building on the top of the plot plan, also move that down by 4 feet and put in landscaping.
so, few things. They did also show there were 4 additional parking located along, I think, Bay Street. Yes, along Bay Street, which has also handicap parking spaces. That's not indicated in the plan. And don't know if the owner is planning to retain that, and that goes to that there is a lot more parking space there. And there is room, I agree with you, there's room for landscaping. I think we do not have a lighting plan, so that would be helpful.
It's a lighting plan and the spread drawing.
Yes, and the fence is very much in need of repair. There are slats missing, they're bent. And what was interesting is there are banners on it. When the photos were taken, the banners were rolled up. And then in some other photo, you see the banners are rolled back down. So please, just clean it up, take the banners off, and be compliant with the signage regulation. The location of the trash storage, that's not clearly indicated. I think I know where it is, or should be, but that needs to be indicated. And like you said, there are a lot of excess storage bins and material that needs to be removed.
And the trash storage has to be in an enclosure.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
This concludes the public review session for August 7th, 2017.